Welcome back to our Simple Healthy Life podcast, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations on topics that we find interesting. And today, we wanted to talk a little bit about attention, awareness, multitasking, and this tool that we have recently been speaking a lot about, and that is the tool of checking in with yourself. We want to talk a little bit about the value behind it, the why we do it, and I specifically would like to talk about the how. Right? What does that mean to actually check in with yourself? So I'll start with you. How often do you check in with yourself during the day?
Yeah, it's tough to say, right? And we talk about these things all day long. We talk about this to our clients, to people who ask us for help, and the number one suggestion is, well, check in, right? Or be intuitive. Yet, I find that some days it's really hard, right? It's like I have an early client, and then I'm back to back to back to back. And when I'm in with one client and finishing up, I'm thinking, okay, this next one's coming in, or I see them come in, and that's challenging. And then I have some other obligation, like go and do jujitsu or something. And so it seems like a lot of days, almost every hour of my day has been booked ahead of time, and it's very difficult for me to check in. And by difficult, I mean that it kind of slips my mind. And so some days, MJ, I'm literally like, I'm going. I don't even have time I do have time, but I don't prioritize time to eat effectively. And then I can feel myself. I get to the end of the day and I'm just like so drained, and I just haven't stayed on top of it. And so other days are better than others. Yesterday, middle of the day, I kind of like went outside and sat in the sun and did some journaling, and that was kind of like a form of checking in. But ultimately, I think the goal for a lot of people is to check in as often as possible, right? Have your attentive and attention needs to be, directed where it should be, and in the moments where maybe we would typically like scroll on the phone or, watch something or whatever it might be, maybe using those little moments to check in. Where are you at? Are you hungry? Do you need to stretch? Do you need to move? Right? How are you feeling? Do you need to process these things, something emotionally, right? As we just finished up a podcast with Lauren, talking about like checking in emotionally was very important, and processing those was very important. So yeah, I think the answer to that, plain and simple, becomes it depends. It depends on the day.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think a lot of people can relate to what you just said about every hour of your day is scheduled, right? And I can tell you, for me, a lot of times I'm awake at the last possible minute I can wake up before I have to be to where I need to be, which for me is exactly 4:37 a.m. because my clients start at 5. And I go from 5 to 6, and to your point, someone's already standing there at 5:50 to be ready for my 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, and 12 to 1. Right around 1 o'clock, I usually get that first break, which I then realizing now I haven't eaten and got to prioritize eating and then switch gears into the things that I'm choosing to do, right? Whether it's this podcast or building out a plan for a speech that we're giving. And as soon as I'm done with that, I have planned to have dinner with my wife. So I'm going to go home and I'm going to make dinner, and then I'm going to have dinner with her, and I'm going to talk to her about her day, and then I'm going to likely watch about 30 to 35 minutes of TV, and then I'm going to go to bed. And I can go an entire week without checking in. And even though I make that sound, that was my Tuesday. Okay, so on Wednesday I did get the opportunity to spend a little time lifting and doing my own personal stuff, but I didn't take the opportunity to really check in. I just was like, okay, now from 11 to 12 or from 12 to 1, I'm going to lift. My client canceled, I can just lift. And I think we all have that, right? And not to mention adding in kids, right? So many of our listeners are moms and dads, and it's become this socially right thing to do to prioritize every aspect of your kid's life before you spend the time checking in with yourself. And I think today I want to talk a little bit about, well, how do we check in with ourselves? Maybe we'll start at the very beginning. Right? How do we do that? What does it mean to check in with yourself? And why would we check in with ourselves? So as far as the why is concerned, I'd like to take a second and just give you an analogy. And the analogy that I've been thinking about lately is this concept of the elastic band. Okay, this elastic band is much like your attention. It can be pulled in every single direction. And you can pull it left, right, up, down, every angle on the 360 degree. Right? And that's the way that we are being pulled all day, every day. And we're really great at pulling on it. But if you pull it one direction and then pull another direction and then pull another direction, eventually you're going to find that elastic band is going to snap. However, if you pull it and pull it and pull it and pull it and then allow it to go back to itself, you can pull on it forever. So what we need to do, and we need to help people understand that going back to finding your center will, in essence, make you better at all of the things that you're trying to do without it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think it's an intuitive thing. You can almost feel it. You can almost feel when the rubber band's been stretched too much, right? This presents for me sometimes as like overstimulation, and to your point about the analogy, it's not that in one moment I feel overstimulated. It's like this very gradual feeling. And I sit there, and sometimes I'll just like lay down. I have like a little couch in the office, and I'll lay down for like 5 minutes in between a client or something, and I'll sit there and I'll feel like so stimulated in the sense that I've been unable to check in, right? My brain is so stimulated, so active, it's always thinking about something else aside from just calming down, being relaxed for a second. And when I notice this, what I've done in the past is I've taken a concerted effort, I think, to have at least a period of time where I go into a very low sensory environment. And so for a little while I was doing like those sensory deprivation tanks, those things?
Yeah.
There's one out in Rhode Island called Float. It's a little bit of a hike, so that's the pain. It's a big pain in the butt. But that was kind of nice because it was a very low sensory environment, right? They put you in this this little pod, and you turn off the lights. You can throw music on or not. I usually just keep the music off. And then the water is very dense with sodium, salt, and so you float, and the water is also heated to body temp. So, the idea is that you're not getting a ton of like auditory sensation, stimulation. You're not getting a lot of like the feeling or touch sensory experience. You're just kind of sitting there in the dark, floating. And I find yes, it is boring, right? Like, but that's
Kind of the goal.
that's part of it, right? Is to not have this kind of like to really limit the sensory input, right? And to sit there for 45 minutes or an hour is changing in the sense that it gives your brain just time to relax. And I really valued that. The other day, I think we were just talking, and I didn't do that, but I went out and paddleboard with my dog on the lake, just me, Teddy, and I was journaling a little bit on the lake. I just like sat there, laid down, and that was really nice too, because I find that it's easier for me to cut the stimulation out if I do something that enables me to be in that spot, right? And so taking that time and really just engaging in or disengaging really from stimulation has helped. And yeah, I feel it build up, and I think it's hard to describe what that feeling is. I wonder do you experience the same thing, that like the feeling of stimulation kind of building up and feeling like your brain's just too active almost?
Something that's happened a lot recently to me is that I have been going, and then I crash. And I mean, I crash to the point of I'll sit in my car, I'll drive home, I'll sit in my driveway, and I'll just be like, I just want to stay here for 5 minutes.
Right.
A couple times recently, I've even fallen asleep just sitting in my car, and it's good. It's been more of an eye-opening experience than anything negative or positive. But I feel like I was. We had talked about this, so I'll kind of tell the audience. I grew up in a household with 13 people, right? So I was always stimulated. There was always people around, and I like that. I've become very good at it. To our opening, right? We're great at multitasking, and I'm great at managing my time when it comes to big groups. And but now, as I'm aging, maybe I'm getting a little older. Maybe it's something that I'm just noticing more. I am crashing. That rubber band is essentially snapped, and I need that time just to reset and start again. And it's happening to me on a daily basis, whereas before I could go weeks, sometimes longer, without even thinking about it. Just the next day, next task, next day, right? Look at the calendar before you go to bed. All right, I got 11 things I got to do tomorrow, and just keep going. So what I'm learning how to do, and I'd like to share with the audience, is how to return to your center in a short period of time. And the answer for me is become this 4-step process. It is turn my attention from the outside to the inside, listen or look at my thoughts from a step back, listen to my body, and then remind myself that everything is okay. And sometimes that last one is remind myself that I can do this, remind myself that I'm great, remind myself that I'm positive, whatever that reminder is. But the way that I do that now is, to your point about sensory deprivation, I put myself in a quiet spot, I close my eyes, I turn my attention inward through my breath. I take 5 breaths in through my nose, extend my exhale as long as I can. That takes about 9 to 10 seconds. And then I sit for a moment, I don't know how long, and I really look at my thoughts, not individually, but I say to myself, okay, let's examine what's happening in my head. Are my thoughts coming in quickly? Are they coming in jumbled? Is it the same 4 that I've been having for the last hour? Right? And without judgment, I say, okay, those are my thoughts. Then I turn my attention down into my body. Is my heart racing? Do I have to go to the bathroom? Have I eaten in a while? When I check in that way, my body almost rewards me with some type of signal that says, everything's okay. Then I remind myself, I can do whatever's coming up next. And I almost get like a fresh start. I feel like now that I've been embodying that and really working at it, I have noticed that my crashes have been less, and I've been a better version of myself when I'm showing up for this next thing, whatever I do. Now, the challenge I'm still having is, and to your point, I don't do it often enough. Right. I manage to forget or think that I'll do it next time, or I'll do it after this next client. And what happens, and actually what's been happening, is I get all the way to the part where I'm ready to have dinner with my wife. And what does she say? What happened today? How was your day? And I haven't spent the time returning to center, so it's just another tug on that elastic band. And by that time, I'm like, my elastic band needs to close its eyes, slow down, and leave me alone in some way, right? Which is not the best to develop a relationship or keep a strong relationship with anybody, let alone someone who's interested in what you have to say.
Yeah.
So that was a long way to say, I'm doing it. When I do it, it's effective. I don't seem to be able to do it enough.
Yeah, it's hard to fit in, right? Especially you can have a routine, and like the morning routine is all great, but unless you have this habit of checking in really solidified, then it's challenging. And trust me, I completely relate to the whole like getting through the day, then being at the dinner table and being asked, "How was your day?" And I'm like, "Whoa, that is a lot. That is a lot." And yeah, I think a lot of people are overstimulated in so many ways, and I always joke about Alicia and how Alicia's family and even her like kind of manage their energy. They just seem to go at 100%, like complete excitement, complete engagement in everything, intensity almost, and then they crash. But they don't they don't seem to realize it. Like, sometimes Alicia's sister will come over and she'll go, and then the next thing you know, she's asleep on the couch, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, you were just going 100% all day, and now you're.
That's me.
Yeah. And so it's almost like not necessarily recognizing that they are burning themselves out, and not having the habit of practicing some solitude and just letting the mind relax. One thing that I think is really helpful in terms of building the habit of checking in with yourself is this idea of mindful transitions. I don't know if I ever talked about it on here or not, but it's a really cool idea. I forget where I got it from, but essentially we have so many transitions throughout the day, right? Like, you and I are going to finish this, and we're going to go transition to our clients or to the next thing, but there is going to be a transition at some point. And I noticed for myself that I would carry this type of like emotional energy or some type of energy from clients into home or whatever it might be, right? It's like I'm have difficult conversation after difficult conversation, and it almost like taints your mind in some sense. There's a feeling there, right? It's baggage. And so I would carry that over into the next event, next client, next whatever, dinner at home. And that was tough. And the important thing to recognize is that through these transitions, we can actually be mindful about them. And I don't do this very often at all, but I do it often enough, I guess, to talk about it, is that I'll sit there and it will be like 2 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. And first thing I'll do, like you said, I'll take a couple deep breaths, and I'll try to just relax everything, like fully relax every muscle in my body. So it's like, if you're familiar with body scans, like that's what you would do, just a quick body scan and relax all the muscles. Take a couple big deep breaths, because that's going to lead to a more like physiologic reduction of some of those stress hormones. And then, yeah, where am I at? Am I hungry? Am I full? Do I need to go to the bathroom? How am I feeling, right? Do I need to process anything like that? Am I in dire need of anything? And then the next part is, once I sort through all that and pay attention to some of those thoughts, then the next part is, how do I want to be intentional for this next moment? And so, to your point, like driving back home and parking in the driveway, you do this, and you go through the whole body scan, breathing thing. And then the next part, intentionality. How do you want to greet your wife? Right? How do you want to go into the house? Do you want to be a pleasant person? Do you want to be a tired person? Do you want to be an old person, crippled, right? Like, how do you want to be? And part of I think of a simple, healthy, good life is really just setting an intention on how you want to be, right? But you can only do that if you check in with yourself, and that's where it becomes so important, because we're talking about this rubber band, and we're stretched in all these different ways. We don't get any time to think about how we want to be, and this is true for every area, especially true for when we're talking about like self-care in regards to eating, right? So many people will go into meals and just it's like you black out. You woke up at the end of the meal and you're like, I don't even know what happened. I just ate 10 donuts, and it's because you weren't intentional. You didn't go in with the idea of like, here's how I want to approach this meal, right? So intentionality is a very important part of self-care and life, and a successful one, I think.
Oh, man, I'm always amazed when we get to have these conversations, and the intentionality of it all is really something that is actually what I'm trying to articulate when I say check back in, right? I want all the time to show up as my most authentic self. And I've learned over time that I like my most authentic self, and that the people around me generally respond positively when I am being my most authentic self. And the way that I can do that is through that intentional start from center, work my way out. And I think a lot of people are the same way. I think that, you know, when you're in a position where you're working with others, right? You were probably hired because your most authentic self showed up for that interview. You were able to say the things you wanted to say, make a connection with the interviewer, and that's when they knew you'd be a good fit. Now, does that mean that your most authentic self shows up every single day for work? Absolutely not, right? We all have these competing priorities. You know, maybe your dog that goes out every morning, and you know that you have to be at work at 9, and you take your dog out every morning, and every morning he comes back in, and this morning he didn't. Just decided he wanted to be outside for longer, right? Your kid who eats pancakes and every morning he loves the pancakes, and this morning he just didn't, right? And now all of these things have weighed on you before you got to this place that you're supposed to be showing up as your most authentic self. And now your emotions are off, your thoughts are wound up, and you have an interaction with someone that you work with that is truly just not who you really are. And how often is this happening to us, right? We live in a society that praises us for multitasking. It praises us for being able to take those emotions, those thoughts, shove them down, and continue on. But if we can work through them, recognize them, and then show up as our most authentic self, that's when we start to live this simple, healthy life, right? And I'm grateful that you use that word intentionality, because the more I set my intention, the more often I can remember and remind myself to set my intention, the more often I feel that authentic me comes through. And now just listening to you talk about these intentional transitions and intentional aspects that we can bring to ourselves, I feel like that's something that I can further embody.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a great habit, and I think it's something that we'll always be practicing. We'll always be trying to practice, and we are unintentional in almost every aspect of life. I have a funny story. I recently was talking with someone about, who's very good at like skin care and hair care and all of these different things, right? And they're kind of like, they were giving me tips like, do this and do that and conditioner and here's actually how you wash your face and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting there and my mind's blown, because one, no one's ever said like, oh, by the way, Ryan, when you're in the shower, just use water and exfoliate. You know, like I didn't even know what exfoliate means. It's like, you see it on the commercials, but you know, nonetheless. So my mind's blown because I'm learning all these things, and then I'm also learning I'm so unintentional in the shower. Like literally, my shower routine was just shampoo, like soap, and then then I'm good to go. Like I hit every spot got scrubbed a little, got soap a little, and I smelled pretty good. It's fine, right? But now I'm like, wow, that was so unintentional during that whole time, and this is a period of time in which I could be more intentional. So then I'm like literally taking notes, and I'm putting these things into action and recognizing that it's kind of hard. It's like there's a lot of attention required, and in one way, I truly do value just zoning out in the shower, right? But in another way, I'm zoning out. I'm lost in thought, right? And this kind of being lost in thought is what we're trying to fight against. Being lost in thought is basically akin to scrolling, right? So you're not doing anything good up there. You might be reliving some cool memories or having some interesting thoughts. You might also be experiencing very repetitive negative thoughts, right? You probably are.
Most likely.
Given the 85-95% kind of ratio that we've talked about plenty of times. And so bottom line is you're not doing anything up there that you think you're doing, right? You're not planning anything logistically because you're incapable of creating a plan and then putting it to action just based on mental work alone. Like you need to write it down. You need to like have verticality in your thought, right? Not just like horizontal, like this thought and that thought. And dogs are cute sometimes, and brown also. And it's like it's one of those things where we feel that it's helpful to think, but it's really not. And so, yeah, trying to catch yourself and being intentional in action. And so now in the shower, I'm taking action. I'm doing actions rather than thinking. And so if we can just be more intentional and take more intentional actions across the day and be mindful of that, then I think we're getting closer. We're getting closer to where we need to be.
Yeah. It's funny. What you are talking about is essentially your default mode network, right, and your task positive network. And what we know about the brain is that both of those are happening, and only one is in charge for a period of time. So when your default mode network is firing, for you it's in the shower, for me it's my ride to work. It doesn't matter what's happening around me. I'm engaged in the future, the past, or self-referential thought, and those thoughts that you talked about. When my task positive network is firing, I'm engaged in the world around me. I'm actively trying to scrub my calf to make sure that I do the things that I'm supposed to do in my shower. I'm actively engaged in paying attention to driving to work. I'm actively engaged in listening to you. And this check-in process that you talked about, what it does is it fires up that task positive network. And for the people out there listening, the more often you can fire up that task positive network, the dimmer this default mode network gets. This is when we start to have memories. This is when we start to make memories. This is when we start to live life. These are the things that happen when later on in the day, when your wife does say, hey, what happened today? You never tell her that, I spent an hour spaced out, right, thinking about something that happened, right? You never tell her, I spent an hour scrolling through my phone. What you say is, hey, no, I was intentionally talking to this client and they mentioned this, and these are the things that mattered when they said that, or these are the activities that I was engaged in. This is when you're actually paying attention to the life you're living. And the more often we can check in, the more we can create this muscle memory, these neural pathways, the more often the muscle of our brain is focused on living the life we want and not just getting lost in this doom scrolling, this random 85 to 95% negative self-referential thought. And that is what's leading us towards this simple, healthy life. Now, if you can take this and add intentionality to it, I think we're really onto something.
Yeah, no, I love the way you just described that, and I think it's huge to take home some of those points, right? We lack intentionality, and we're just lost in the thought, and maybe for many people, I'm sure they're lost in great thoughts, right? Great, good, positive thoughts. They're pretty happy people, but even then, you're lacking on maybe experience those. You're lacking the life that you want to live, because I mean it's such a great point to say, well, you don't tell the wife about, oh yeah, I scrolled for an hour, I found this great TikTok or whatever it is, whatever people use. I found this great one. It's like, I mean, maybe sometimes, but very rarely, right? Very rarely you've scrolled past and watched 1,000 TikToks before you find one that's worthy of sharing, right? And actually, side note, I had a thought that a lot of these algorithms probably prey a little bit on that lottery ticket kind of feeling. Like you go through 1,000 of them, but there's one that's really like interesting and good, and it's like they don't show you those all the time, because that would be that'd be too easy, right? You go on there for 5 minutes, you get a ton of good information, a ton of good content. You're like, I'm good. But
well, they've actually proven that doom scrolling method, and if I'm going to use I'm using the word doom scrolling, and for people that don't know it, I didn't make it up. Although I think we can all realize why it's called that.
Yeah.
essentially these people realized that when you got to the bottom of your first Google page and you had to click to the next Google page, and if there's anybody on here that has ever been to Google page number 3, raise your hand because you're a weirdo. No one does that, right?
Yeah.
So what they figured out was, hey, we need this to not end.
Yeah.
So we'll scroll. And that's where this doom scrolling came from. And what they figured out is that doom scrolling, they call it, it keeps your default mode network firing. So it's not task positive. When we say task positive, we don't mean scrolling aimlessly, because what is happening, you're seeing that information and you're flipped back into your own self-referential thought. You're next, not interest, nope. Right? So it is actively engaged in, and this is the challenge that we're having with kids, and I would say adults, but they're probably not going to admit to it. It's firing up this default mode network. You're spending however many hours of your day in this default mode network, and it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And your ability to do that is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, thus pushing down this task positive network that is associated with focus, confidence, authenticity, all these good things that we want to levitate, elevate in our life. We're actively pushing down by using this social media and by spending the time that we think we're doing something useful. We're not.
Yeah, I think it's challenging because during COVID we had this period of time where there was not much going on. Netflix was around, and they were still maybe putting out things from like that 2019 period of time. And so there was a couple new things coming out. And I remember watching a couple series. I couldn't even tell you the names of them right now. I watched a couple series, and then maybe like legit 3 years later, 2 years later, maybe 2 years, going back and like seeing these series in which seemed vaguely familiar. I'm like, pop it on. Everything about this seems vaguely familiar, but I couldn't tell you a thing that happened, right? Characters seem vaguely familiar. The plot seems vaguely familiar. But as for all intents and purposes, it was completely new to me. And then finding out later, I watched all this stuff. I engaged with all of that. And I think that if you took the doom scrolling that you did 6 months ago, you took a day and you completely replicated every scroll and every video you came across, I think most of that would be pretty new. It would seem pretty new. It would seem like vaguely familiar. Maybe it's in there somewhere, but you'd probably do the exact same thing, and that's that default mode network is you're not learning. You're just operating, right? It's like you're just robotic, and so it's kind of a scary thought. And it's also even a more of a scary thought where I have no statistics to back this up, just based on what I hear people say and how they interact with me and explaining where they got their information. But I think most people get a lot of their information from social media now, like any kind of information. And some of it, don't get me wrong, some of it's pretty solid, right? Like we put out information.
Yes.
Ours is good.
I just learned there's a camera right there that I can make eye contact with, so that's what I'm happy.
We figured it out. We figured out the camera scheme. So it's not that the information in and of itself is poor, but you're trying to take in information when your brain's default mode network is activated. It's just not
going to work.
It's not going to help. It's not going to help. You're not going to retain that. You might retain it for 3 months, but then you're done. It's gone. It's lost. And so you're better off just doing something, right? You're looking up, ways to build a deck for 6 months, and you're looking up all these social media videos. You're going to lose all of it. You might as well just go and try to build a deck, with a vague idea of how to go about it. You probably learn it and do it faster than you being in this kind of deliberative mindset that never gets anything done.
Yeah. You want to prove it to yourself, drive to work. Drive the same way that you've driven every single day, put on your podcast, and then tell me how much of your ride to work you remember.
Right, none.
0. Yep. And part of that is because we know this to be true. Your brain is only concerned about 2 things. It's a weird thing to think about, but it's accurate. Your brain is concerned about duration and outcome. Your brain knows you're going to get to work by 9:05, and it knows that your outcome is going to be just fine. So what happens? It checks out. And you're allowed And it's why we're good at this multitasking thing, right? Taking our attention from driving to our phone, hopefully not, even though, let's face it, that's what's going on, or to our podcast that we're listening to, or to whatever we're thinking about. We can do that because of this default mode network. It's very valuable to us. But when we're in it, when it's firing more actively, and just so we're clear, before I make some people think that I'm crazy, it's not an off-on thing, right? It's one will be more heavily weighted than the other, right? So we always have in the back of our mind this task positive part, and then one will creep up and the other one will creep up. But when we're engaged in this stuff, this scrolling or this driving to work, and we're not paying attention, we are truly making that stronger. And you have to decide, which one do you want to be stronger? And we know the answer for every person in here. We want a stronger task positive network. We want a stronger life. We want a fuller, more memorable life. So what we have to do then is figure out how often can we check in with ourselves to bring ourselves back into that task positive network, to be intentional about ourselves in these intentional transitions. I didn't know we were going to go this way with this conversation, but the fact that you've really brought up these intentional transitions, maybe that's the answer, right? Before you get out of the car to go in and speak with your wife for that night, or before you show up for work, right? Before you get in your car, when you're in your shower, these are the times when you can intentionally transition from one thing to the next and pull that rubber band back to center so that you can then go out and be that rubber band that everybody expects and wants you to be.
Right. Yeah, no, I love it. Build the habit of checking in, build the habit of transitioning mindfully, build the habit of maybe doing things different just because you're doing them different. And maybe I'll challenge this to you, and this will be for just more you and I. What if we spent like 3 days doing things as different as possible? So that could be when you're driving to your gym or driving to work or whatever it is, you take a different route. It takes a minute longer, but it's a different route. Or if you brush your teeth with your left hand as opposed to your right hand, or you shower differently, you exfoliate. Folks, we exfoliate.
I'm in. I just want you to know, this is just so we're clear, I'm in. But I do have a very distinct memory of my girlfriend at the time, my wife now. She wanted to spark conversation at dinner.
Yeah.
So she asked me if I would intentionally eat with my other hand, which meant cut my meat with the other hand. It messed me up for like a week. Like I struggled. I did it, but then it was a tough thing to do. So yeah, I'm in.
You remember that week?
I do remember. Yeah, I very much remember the conversation around it, and I remember that it challenged me, and I do remember that it worked, and I guess it worked.
Case in point. You didn't remember any other weeks, but you remember that event, that experience.
Do. Yeah, so I'm in. Let's do it. We'll follow up with our next podcast to see how this went, but I'm definitely in.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and it might be an interesting challenge, even if you just do like it for someone else at home, just does it a little differently, does something a little differently, and in terms of like the science around this, they know that your brain is more apt to create neural connections when you do things differently. It's why I tell people who are stuck in the habit of maybe overeating at night, I tell them to break the routine. Don't do what you normally do. Break the associations. One of the reasons why we eat is because we have associations with certain activities. So, for example, sitting on the couch watching TV is typically associated with snacking, or playing a game is associated with snacking. So maybe don't do those things. Maybe do something else one night and see what goes into that, right? I mean, just breaking some of these associations is very helpful, and it does cultivate experience and memory. And I can already imagine me driving a different way to jiu-jitsu probably remember it. I would probably remember what goes on because it's so new. So yeah, should be interesting.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a long one.
Yeah.
But that was an interesting topic for me, and I do feel like we hit our goal of having real, insightful conversations today.
Definitely.
So, You guys can find us anywhere podcasts are found. Spotify is probably our favorite. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.